Dreams are extremely significant. How do we view Yosef's dream? His brothers viewed it one way. His brothers see that here's a fellow that is obsessed with power. He sees it as, I have a mission here. I have a role, I am a leader, and I'm going to reach my role of leadership one way or another. And in the beginning of this week's Parsha, Yosef's journey to leadership begins with the dream. Parshas Miketz shnatayim yamim. These are 2 years that he's spending in jail, after spending already a decade in jail. And Pharaoh has his dreams, standing by the Nile, standing by the river that was worshipped by the Egyptians. And he has 2 images, 2 dreams. We are familiar with them. Dream number 1 of Pharaoh is that there are 7 cows, which are robust, nice, fat, gesunte cows, come out of the Nile, and behind them, there are 7 ugly cows that appear as well. The ugly cows go ahead and swallow up the fat cows. That's dream number 1. Dream number 2 in verse 5, he has 7 shibolim. He sees 7, it's translated in old Bibles as ears of corn. They used to call it grain corn, but we're going to call it grain because we don't want to go ahead and place corn in Egypt when they didn't have corn, what we call corn in Egypt. Some claim that kitnios became a problem as a result of this corn. In other words, corn technically should not be kitnios, right? It wasn't in existence in the 12th and 13th century in Europe. So why do we not eat corn? Well, when a corn arrived in Europe, they called basically corn grain. It's the same root. So they said corn, it's a type of grain, we're going to avoid it. That's how it became part of the kitniot family, when technically speaking, anyone who eats quinoa could eat corn, technically speaking. The only problem is a bad name, corn got stuck in that monster called minag kitniot, and grain and quinoa did not. But in any event, he has a dream, and in the dream he sees the 7 ears of grain sprouting on one stalk. And then these are beautiful ones, and again swallowed by thin ones. He wakes up. The butler, the cupbearer, turns to him and says, I had a dream in the jail. I'll share it with you. They call Yosef up. Yosef is presented the dream by Pharaoh, and then, let's just turn fast to page 226. And Yosef begins his interpretation. You should know, Pharaoh, Chalom echadu, it's all one dream. It's one dream you have, so anything you've heard beforehand that they represent 2 different ideas, forget it. There are going to be 7 years of blessing, followed by 7 years of famine. The famine is going to be so great that it will swallow up the years of blessing. Now, what you need to do is find a person that is wise, that has the fear of God, who can go ahead and deal with the situation. He gives some advice as well, and Pharaoh follows suit. And page 228, Vaitava davar beinei Paro. Pharaoh is extremely satisfied in verse 37. And he says to Yosef, there's no one like you that has the Spirit of God. And now we're going to read in detail, verse 39. Vayomer Paro el Yosef. Pharaoh says to Yosef, Acharei hodia Elokim otcha et kol zot. After God has informed you of all this with your, divine spirit that is within you, there is no one as ein navon vechacham kamocha. There is no one as wise as you. Ata, therefore, in verse 40, you, Yosef, tihiyeh al beiti. From this point on, you're going to be in charge of my palace. Ve'al picha yishak kol ami, and you should know all my people are going to be sustained on your word. But, of course, rak hakiseh egdal mimeka. In other words, you should know that the throne will outrank you. You are in charge of Egypt, he is told in verse 41. He's given in verse 42 the ring, the seal, decision-making, has to have the seal of the king. The king himself has others taking charge of it, and it's handed down to Yosef, is making all the practical decisions. He is placed on what some call Air Force 2, right? The royal chariot, Merkevet HaMishneh, the chariot which is second in command, and he makes his journey throughout Egypt, As a 30-year-old, he reaches the top. Magnificent, unbelievable, incredible story. And then he begins this, after having his 2 children, he begins this journey of manipulating his brothers. The brothers come, they do not recognize him, they would never dream that they would find him there. And he begins this process of accusations. The first one is, what does he say to them? You are spies. Okay, so let's turn to verse 9. Verse 9 on page 234. Vayiskor Yosef et chalamot. So the first thing that happens is that he remembers the dreams. Asher chalam lahem, that he dreamt regarding them. And he turns to them and he says, Meraglim atem. You are spies. You are here to find the weaknesses of our country. And they start defending themselves. We are familiar with the story, but what's he doing? What's he trying to achieve? Obviously, when they come and they bow to him not recognizing him, they bow to him because they are in desperate need of food. There is a famine in the land of Israel. They are afraid that their families are going to starve. They bow to him. What clicks in his head? Bingo. In other words, I had a dream. I had a vision. It was prophecy. One day my brothers are going to bow to me, and here it was achieved. Now, what was he trying to achieve with it? In other words, I have a dream that I'm going to, beat my brothers in basketball. I beat them. It is far more than that. What he believes is that he has a significant role that relates to the mission of their family. What was the mission of their family? What was their Judaism about? We talk about the fact that they were descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. What was their message? What was their vision? Their vision was that they had a very unique role of educating the world, inspiring the world. But that's a role of leadership. Avraham was that leader. Yitzchak was that leader. Yaakov was that leader. Comes Yosef and he recognizes that he's the one that's going to take over that role. Perhaps with his brother, but he is the leader over all of them. So when this dream is coming about, it's a dream that in his mind, it is there for the sake of the redemption of the world, to fix the world. We focus so much on fixing the world. Spiritually, giving meaning, right? We live, the world has many distractions. The world, you could entertain yourself today to 24 hours a day. Right? You could get involved in all kind of fascinating things. Once in a while, we have experiences when we realize that there's more to the world than what we see, and we seek out people who live their life not by the physical world that we live in, but by something greater. That's why we turn to spiritual leaders. The idea is that there's a recognition that there's more to life. And by connecting to people that are spiritual, recognize the fact that the world is far more than just a magnificent place to enjoy good beverages, we become elevated by relating to them. That's our condition. And we believe that we have a role. We're not a selfish religion. Not at all. We are a religion that believes that we have that mission to elevate the world, to share with them. That when we talk about a temple in Jerusalem that's open to humanity, it is that idea that the world needs it. The world needs it. So therefore they will recognize our unique role. And that's how we're going to inspire and elevate humanity. That's this idea of this Messianic era. Messianic era to children, at times, at least from the coloring books that I see at home, is this idea that in the Yemos HaMashiach, fruits are going to be much bigger, right? Or as according to the Talmud, bread is going to grow on trees. Shirts are going to grow on trees. These are terms that are presented in the Talmud. Unfortunately, if you only focus on the literal mean, what's this Messianic era? A time when you're going to enjoy yourself even more, because now a cherry, even the genetically modified cherries are big. But wait till the Yemos HaMashiach, the cherries are going to be like the size of a watermelon. And that's why I'm waiting for the Mashiach, because I like cherries, and I like big cherries. That's the Yemos HaMashiach. And that's a picture that if you take these statements of the Talmud literally, that's how you're going to walk away what our religion is about. To enjoy ourselves even more. We, of course, believe that the Messianic era is much, much more than that, or it is in essence something very, very different. That it is there to touch the human race, to elevate the world, to teach them about God, teach them about values. Now, if we want to become educators, we first need a degree. that says that we're qualified. And to be qualified as an educator, number one, the Jewish people have to get along. We're not there yet as a result, right? We're not ready for it. But if you would ask Yosef, or even if you would ask his father, what are you waiting for? What's the era you're waiting for? I am waiting for an era when I could live calmly in the land of Israel. I could live in the land of Israel with my family getting along, and do as my grandfather Abraham did, and reach out to people, touch them, inspire them. That's this messianic era that we talk about. So it's not, we have to realize it is far more than just a Jewish experience. It's a world's experience. And Yosef believed that he's going to become the leader among his brothers. So his vision, when he woke up in the morning, and he said, boy, my brothers are going to bow to me, right? They appeared in the dream as these bundles of grain. They're going to bow to me. That's going to begin the process of me becoming the leader, like the Mashiach of the people of Israel. And as a result, all of us could do our role to humanity. I'm the one. I'm the chosen one. Bingo, that's what he thought. So when it actually takes place, when dream number one is fulfilled, and it's interesting, why do they come to Egypt? For grain. What was image number one? What was vision, dream number one for Yosef? That there were sheaves of grain bowing to him. So he says, aha, the journey has begun. I have one more dream to achieve. Now, it was a little bit of a problem, because dream number one, if you remember in the beginning of last week's portion, it doesn't mention numbers. It just mentions, Hine anachnu me'almim alumim betoch hasadeh. We are creating these bundles. Veine kam alumati, and my sheaf stood up, right? And the other ones, it doesn't mention a number. So dream number one is fulfilled when 10 of his brothers, only 10 of them are there. He's one, Benjamin's home. 10 of them show up, they bow to him, ding, 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 in his mind, mission accomplished, I'm halfway there. Dream number two, what I need to do is get my other brother. Eventually I'm going to have to get my father as well. That's what the dream said. And I'm going to have to get my surrogate mother, right? Bilaz, the one that raised him. I'm going to have to get the ganze mishpacha to come down and bow to me. That's dream number two, a little bit more complex. I'll get there. But in his mind, mission is going to be achieved. They're going to all go ahead and bow to him, and then we will reach this messianic era. That's how he envisioned it. That's what's happening in his mind. Fine? So that's why he's playing this game. Now, when they walk in, the first thing he accuses them of is, you are spies. You are spies. Why does he begin with that? Well, explanation number one. He knows very well that with the research, you could find out a lot of things. And he knew, and there are midrashim that know that when the brothers came down to Egypt, they had two goals. Goal number one, get some food for the family to survive this famine. Goal number two, let's find out what really happened with Yosef. So they started asking questions. Midrashim know they went to brothels because that's where they thought they would find him. They started asking questions. That's what he was trying to avoid. If they didn't ask questions, they might pick up on something. So how do you stop people from asking questions? Accuse them of being a spy. If you walk into a country, if you come to a country and they accuse you on the border, you walk in, I'm sure if you visit today Iran, not recommended. So the first thing they do is going to accuse you of being a spy, because they know very well that you're not going to ask any questions afterwards, because any questions you ask will be clear-cut evidence that you are spying on the country. That's goal number one of what he is trying to achieve by accusing them of being spies. Explanation number two works with the following. Let's go back to the Parsha. Egypt, beginning of the Parsha. Egypt is going to have a famine. Famine relates to grain. What was dream number one that Pharaoh has? Dream number one was not regarding grain, it was about cows. The second dream was a dream of grain. So the commentators wonder, what exactly do the cows symbolize? Meaning, if that was what we're trying to achieve here, if God is trying to communicate with Pharaoh that there's going to be a famine in the land, why have a cow dream at all?
Didn't they worship the cows?
Okay, so they worship the cows. So it was something, and that's an explanation given, that it's the Nile, that the cows itself that they worship are not going to provide. That's one explanation given. Ramban gives another explanation that it was a famine that's going to affect the process of working the land, the plowing. Plowing was done with cows. So therefore, that's how it related to it. So different explanations are given. Comes the Meshech Chachma. So we're sharing with you an insight that comes from Rameir Simcha Dvinsk, the beginning of the 20th, towards the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. Usually we don't turn to authorities of this era to explain something that I would expect earlier authorities to address, but it's an incredible insight that has been worked with by many. And it works as follows. There was a prophet called Amos. Amos was critical of the people of Israel, that in the northern region, they were only interested in satisfying themselves. They were corrupt, they were wealthy. All they wanted to do is eat, drink, be merry, and ignore what's happening in society. And when leaders, people that have power, people that have the ability to make change, ignore the small person, that is considered, based on Torah values, the greatest corruption. So he's critical of what he calls parot habashan hayoshvim behar Shomron, the fat cows that are in the Bashan, in an area that's very lush, sitting in the Shomron in Samaria. They don't give one iota. They are not concerned at all with the welfare of the poor because they're wealthy. They're okay. They're comfortable. And God is extremely critical of parot habashan. Parot, fat cows, became a symbol, in English, right? A symbol of someone that is just concerned about themselves. A corrupt society is when leaders do not take their responsibility seriously and ignore the needs of the masses. That means that there's corruption in the country. And what is taking place here is that Pharaoh's dream has two parts to it. Part number 2 is indeed the famine. But part number 1, you want to know why there's going to be famine? You want to know what the issue is in your society? There are fat cows. Pharaoh and Egypt was run by people that were not concerned about the welfare of society. They took care of their own needs, which would fit very, very well into so many regions in the Middle East. Think about Saddam Hussein in Iraq, the amount of wealth that came in. You think about Libya. I don't know the situation in Saudi Arabia good enough, but I have an assumption that there are even there people that are not receiving everything that you would expect a country that is making billions of dollars a week from oil. There's a society where the wealthy become wealthier and society is not taken care of. Parot HaBashan is the first dream because that's the core issue in Egypt. And therefore, what Yosef, when he tells him, now you find someone to go ahead and fix this country, when Yosef is giving his advice to Pharaoh, he's not just telling him how to deal with the planning for the years of famine that will be preceded with the year of abundance, but he's telling him you have to fix this country. You have to go ahead and transfer the power from these regional leaders, regional individuals who are not concerned about what's taking place. And this is a time to consolidate under someone that is righteous, under someone that is competent. And that's what Pharaoh says. I need someone that is navon, chacham, that fears God. You're the one that's going to fix the problem in this society. And he notes, you want to know how corrupt Egypt was? A young slave works for a minister. The wife makes up an accusation without trial, without anything asked at all. They take the individual, they throw him into jail for 12 years, without questions at all, in a brutal pit. Egypt was corrupt. The idea even that the king, if you think about it, he notes, that he could go ahead, and according to the Midrashim, the sin of the cupbearer and the baker were minor. A pebble is found in the bread, a fly in the wine. Minor transgressions go ahead and either throw you in jail, or in some cases you get the death penalty. What kind of society is that? Right? North Korea, that's what it is. It's a corrupt society. Yosef is told, you have to change this society. That's what Yosef is doing. Now, with that, his brothers come. He's going to be very harsh on them. His treatment of his brothers could just be seen as a continuation of the old Minag Mitzrayim, of the old culture. You're in power, do whatever you want. Oh, you're a leader here? You can make your own personal decisions as how to treat people that come to your office. So therefore, to avoid being accused or to avoid appearing as just being another Egyptian official, when he's going to be harsh on them, what does he do? He accuses them of being spies. And you know how it is in governments, even in the United States. If you say that it's a national security issue, you could do whatever you want. Meaning there are court hearings in the United States. You can have representation. You have the right. You come with lots of rights. As soon as the government goes ahead and accuses you of spying and there's a national security issue, forget it. All those rights are out the window because they claim that if you can have representation, the media is going to find that it can harm our country. That's what he wants. That's what he's doing here. The accusing them of spies is to get around, not to appear as one who is just continuing with the old spiel, with the old game played in Egypt. So this is a vision that he takes of the whole parsha of Yosef given the job of fixing Egypt. But we can actually take the two thoughts that are placed here. One of them is Yosef believing that he is this Messiah, correct? Number two, Yosef is being the one that is fixing Egypt. They actually come together. Let me explain to you why. Humanism, concern for humanity. Is that a kosher value or a value that is against traditional Judaism? Now, the term humanism, if you take just the term humanism on its own, it's a term that in general applies that it is the byproduct of the Enlightenment. An era when we are casting aside religion, casting aside the idea that there's a concept of a revelation. It's relying only on right and wrong based on ethics that are man-made and rational thinking. So therefore, the rational being should be sensitive, and therefore the humanism in general, humanism is always viewed as a contradiction to tradition. When I took courses in Memphis, I had to write a paper. So I talked about what the paper was called Messianic Humanism. How basically it is part of religion. That you should not view it as a contradiction to religion, but if you really focus and try to identify the core of Judaism and the core of the Yemos HaMashiach, you will realize that is humanism. It is concern for humanity. Okay, that's a Jewish approach. Now, when we talk about the Yemos HaMashiach, this Messianic era, it is always taught and it's always addressed as Jews growing spiritually and then reaching this era when suddenly they could reach out and elevate humanity. That's the traditional approach. However, there could be a different way of viewing it. Moshe Rabbeinu, remember he strikes the Egyptian and he goes into hiding. How old is he then according to rabbinic tradition? 12. Now, he comes back to Egypt to let my people go. Right? Now remember the beer in the movie? Right? Charles said that. He's an Alta Yid already. According to the Torah, he's 80. So where exactly was Moshe Rabbeinu until retirement? In other words, from age 12, right, until he was 80, 68 years. Where is he? So the Torah tells us he was by the well. How long can you spend by a well? With all due respect. Right? Okay, he helped the daughters of Safra. That's one day. One day out of 68 years. Where on earth was he? So there are magnificent midrashim that make him a king in Ethiopia, doing things, helping society. So some view it, in other words, a traditional approach was, listen, he's just helping a guy. So you need something to do in 68 years. So the midrash thought, listen, we're not going to say play chess. There were no video games, so let's just make him a king. In other words, they don't see the depth of what he was doing as one that relates to his essence. But you could very well say that to be a redeemer of the people of Israel, you have to be concerned about humanity. Judaism, to value Judaism, you don't have to value Judaism by rejecting the world. That it's us and then all the secondary beings that are called goyim. You don't have to take that approach. Now that's a very traditional approach, by the way, that we view our existence here in the exile as, we could take what we could from society. We have to be decent, but our main goal is ourselves. we could actually view our existence in the exile that when we do things for humanity and we value humanity, they are actually in essence Jewish. For example, there over the past 110 years, there's been a focus and study of Geniza, the Geniza works. In other words, Salman Schechter discovers the Geniza in Egypt. There's a tremendous amount of information that relates to hundreds of years that historians could benefit from to have insight into the period. And there's endless amount of information that's been published already 70 years ago, 80 years ago, and throughout the past few decades. So what would happen is that if you were a scholar, let's say you were a scholar of Maimonides, so you go to the Geniza, you would go to Cambridge, you would go to the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, you would go to Oxford, and you would ask them to have access to the Geniza files. Some of them are in boxes and small pieces of paper, in essence. And you would go through them now. If you find something that relates to the 13th century, you would just shove it aside because that's not what you want to focus on. You're writing your research on the Rambam. The Rambam lived from 1140 to 1205. So therefore, you're only focusing on the end of the 12th century. So anything that's not of your period, you would just run through it and just, here's if it was a piece that related to you, you would pick it up with great caution. You wouldn't even touch it. You would use the designated equipment that they have in an old library. So what was happening is that a lot of the paper and a lot of the, it survived being in a Geniza for hundreds of years, but it did not survive scholars managing it. That's what was happening. Until recently, there's something known as the Friedberg Geniza Project. You can do research on it online, where he funded the scanning of all the Geniza fragments, all of them. All of them were being scanned. And then with computer work, they're able to piece together. And sometimes they have pieces of letters that part of it landed up in Cambridge, part of it landed up in Oxford, part of it in the Hebrew University, part of it in New York. And through this computer work, they're able to go ahead and recreate them. The attitude was basically, what relates to me is important. What doesn't relate to me, and scholars, many of them work like that. If it's their period, they're extremely interested. If it's not their period, they view it as a bittul Torah, as a waste of time, because they want to become the greatest experts in their period. Other periods don't exist for them. And it's an attitude of use what you can for you. Now, sometimes Jews can take that approach to society as well. Jews can take that approach. In other words, if I have a business, correct? I have a business, and I'm in a poor neighborhood selling some kind of shmatis. So I'm selling them and I'm charging a tremendous amount of money and people are paying a lot. But I don't care because I am earning income, I'm earning money, and I'm able to support my local yeshiva. Right? So it's basically using the freedom that we have in this country with zero concern for society. My concern is only for my people. Now that would probably apply well in Poland, 19th century, where anyway the people around you are anti-Semites. Perhaps it's fair. In a society like where we exist, it's a little bit dangerous because then the Jew has the image as someone that their goal is to buy, to buy the jewelry. Now I'll buy your gold and give you a fair price. They give you a price that's a quarter of the actual value. And yes, the money is used. He obviously gives meiser, he gives 10% to his shtibel and to his yeshiva. But the problem is that there's a lack of concern for society. Now you have to be balanced with it. To be only concerned about your society, and meaning about the world, and not be concerned about these institutions that keep Judaism alive is also a problem. Right? You can't be involved with tikkun olam and save the dolphins and save the wild the Amazon, but not be concerned about institutions that preserve your tradition. That's no good. But it's also no good to ignore the world. Yosef is teaching us this idea that a messianic era can come about by being concerned for Egypt, by realizing that you are in essence transmitting Jewish values by uprooting corruption in Egypt. So it's not a contradiction to the Yosef and the way he views himself as a future Messiah. There's no contradiction between him focusing day and night, and he was traveling a lot, there's no contradiction between his commitment to shaping Egypt the way it should be to his vision as this Messiah, because they go hand in hand, because the essence of a Messianic era and a Messianic individual is concern for humanity. So that's how we can go ahead and take the introduction of this portion that relates to parot, relate to corruption, and Yosef fixing it to the mission of Yosef. You know, the traditional approach to it is more that Yosef shapes Egypt in a way where eventually his family and tribe, the Hebrews, could survive in exile. That's a more traditional approach. In other words, there are midrashim that he tells the Egyptians to circumcise. There are such midrashim. So these midrashim are presented, and explanations given are that he wanted to create an environment where the Jews can survive there. In other words, by circumcising, somehow he elevated them spiritually, and the Jews will survive that exile. All these approaches are approaches that basically are saying, listen, in Egypt the Jews go in, go out, there is zero concern for the welfare of Egypt. This approach is a little bit differently, because it is saying he is a person that wants to take the values of the messianic values of Judaism, making the world a better place. How does he do it? By being concerned for his people, but at the same time being sensitive to the world. There's a balance there that we're developing. There's a development that's even happening in North America. You know, everyone's talking about the story of the fellow in Connecticut who found the $98,000. He buys a desk on Craigslist. He finds the $98,000 and he returns it and makes a tremendous Kiddush Hashem, because CNN knows finally rabbis are in the news, and this time they are not arrested, but a rabbi doing a nice thing. And the Agudas Yisrael, right, welcomed him and they honored him by addressing them. Now, I see that as a very positive move, because you're having even the most traditional elements, focusing on this idea that we have a responsibility here in America in publicly acting in a way that elevates and sanctifies the name of God. Like the Feuerstein in Boston 2 decades ago, that has a business, it burned down. Technically, he had no obligation and no responsibility of paying his workers. He did it anyway because he felt it's the right thing to do. The idea of going beyond our boundaries, not being affected by what's outside, but by realizing that when we do the right thing, it shows a concern. We want to make a tikkun olam in essence, but on our terms. A tikkun olam by preserving what we are about is a very significant message, and that's what we could learn from this week's portion. Yosef is having a positive impact on Egypt. He is teaching them values. He is uprooting corruption. And that is part of the messianic vision that he has. He views himself as a Messiah, not a Messiah that will just bring in this era when Jews will have the big fruit, but rather a messianic era that changes the world in a positive way. That's the vision that he has, and it fits into what he is about. And I tie this into Hanukkah a lot. Hanukkah is a time that we publicize a miracle. Pirsumanes, we put it out, if possible, by a window, some people by their front door. It is a time when we want to publicize our miracle not just to ourselves, but rather to the world. The world should know what we are about, and hopefully they will know what we are about in a positive way, of people that value a tradition, but that nevertheless are concerned about what's taking place. There was a young lady in Montreal now, they got elected to, in Outremont, to, is it a city council? Outremont. You'll forgive me. I was once in Montreal for a magnificent wedding. It was Yaakov's wedding at Shar Shamayim. That's a shul, man. Now, so that was my only visit to Montreal, and I don't think it was Outremont. Probably not. No, it's downtown. So I've never been there. So nevertheless, there's this young lady from a Hasidic background, and this Mindy Pollack. And she got elected, and she's fluent in French, in English, and of course in Yiddish. But part of it is this idea that we cannot just live as a Hasidic community, ignoring society, right? Which was the attitude that existed in Crown Heights 2 decades ago. But there's a shift taking place in many different areas, where there's an understanding we can no longer take that shtetl attitude of we do what we do, and let's ignore the world. It is not helpful. and we are strong enough to retain our identity while we interact with them. We are strong enough. We have the ability to preserve our Judaism while we interact and even welcome them to a block party. We could do it. Yes, we can. We have the ability. And communities, these things were simple perhaps to people in this room already 40 years ago, but these are concepts that are having a very positive effect. We're going in the right direction. It happened in Crown Heights, where after the events of the early 90s, there's an effort by many to bring in those communities, to do for their communities, taking the Yosef mode of doing, improving, having a positive effect. So these are the good things that are happening in the world, which we could turn back and say Parshas Miketz teaches us. You want a messianic era, 100%, but do for society, and that is indeed a very important ingredient in having the positive effect on the world. Chanukah Sameach, thank you, we see you all next week. God willing.